Are you ready to reclaim your wellness? Learn how understanding evolution and aligning with our primal needs can help you and your work bestie recharge, realign, and thrive throughout your day. So tune in today and listen to Jenny Powers share how nature holds the key to healing and our optimal health.
Hi, I'm Claude.
And I'm Jess.
We are corporate employees by day, entrepreneurs by night, and work besties for life.
Join us as we explore how work besties lift each other up, laugh through the chaos, and thrive together in every industry.
Work besties!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Work Besties Who Podcast.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Jenny. We're so excited to have Jenny Powers with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So I'll give a little bit about you. You are a scientist, an author, and a former intercollegiate athlete as well. And you've got a great mix of expertise in engineering, immunology, and a passion for writing. I know I read your book on the origin of being. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
And I am so excited to have you on to explore some of the topics that you have in there and talk about how it kind of relates to some of the things that we in our Work Bestie community talk about.
Yeah,
So
well,
welcome.
like I was saying, I've listened to some of your podcasts, and I'm like nodding along and thinking, I think there's a lot of stuff I can say that kind of like totally jives with what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know. It's we've listened to some of your podcasts with other guests, and it's interesting. You talk a lot about nutrition and sleep and a lot of the amazing wellness things that I know our work besties would love. But then there's also some of those other things about the relationships and the personal being with somebody and connection that I think we're really interested to dive into and talk with you about. Before we do that, though, do you want to give a little bit of a background on yourself?
Well, I, like you said, I've kind of done a lot of things all around. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved all around. I went to high school in DC, came out to Colorado to study engineering and play basketball. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to do engineering. Maybe I'll do biological sciences. So I got into the PhD program at the University of Colorado studying immunology. And then I was kind of in my mid-20s and I'd had a lot of success, but I think as probably a lot of your listeners and maybe even you guys have, I got so caught up in my achievements being like my worth was completely tied up in what I achieved. And it wasn't necessarily doing the work that I loved and doing my passion. And so I was not very happy kind of doing the whole postdoc thing. Learning about the human body is amazing and has served me. But it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So when I left academia, I didn't really know what I was going to do, except really deep down inside, I knew I wanted to be a writer. But for some reason, you have all these external expectations put on you, and you have all these internal expectations. And for some reason, like being a writer wasn't even on that list. So when I stopped academia, I actually started writing middle grade fiction, which is 8 to 12-year-olds. And I started writing adult short stories, and I started doing a little bit of nonfiction, maybe for children. But it wasn't until this opportunity to research and write this book with my co-author, Luke Comer, came along that I really was able to bring my scientific background and writing together and be able to actually use a lot of what I trained for so many years. Was really like a very fortuitous meeting.
Yeah.
And so the process of writing the book and then the process of getting it out there and now being on podcasts and meeting amazing people all over the world, it's just really changed my life. So it's been a very interesting ride.
You can see at the end of the day, you have your both passions that you were able to fuse together. And that's fantastic. It's not given to a lot of people to finally find, their passion.
The combination of their passions. So you mentioned your co-writer, Luke, who helped you with the writing of it. What was that like when you met with him? Was it like an instant bond? How did that all come about?
Yeah, well, it's funny because he had an ad. He is very invested in really deep diving into nutrition and how we are misaligned with our genetics and our biological cells through nutrition. And all of his research into that, he's noticed all these other things, other ways that we're not living in accord with our evolved nature. And so, but he didn't have time to kind of research and get all this data together and write a book about all these different ways. And so he put an ad in monster.com, of all places, finding someone to research and write this book. And it was pretty much an automatic, because I wasn't necessarily sure what it was going to be like. And
Yeah.
but I remember my son was in preschool, and I remember being late picking him up. Like I'm because we talked for so long, and I feel like we really gelled. And some of the things he was talking about, some of the things that I had dealt with, like, we're not sleeping right and we're not eating right. And the way we approach work isn't right. And, being with nature, we need to be in nature more, and our connections and all. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And it just started to make sense. Like all the reasons that I was not happy, or maybe not even not healthy, even though I was a collegiate athlete, once that I've had lots of knee surgeries. So I kind of just, my health and nutrition and being in shape kind of, you have kids and then you're
Go back
busy,
burner.
you put the
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
burner. Yeah. But then I realized, the more and more he talked, I'm like, this sounds so amazing. And I didn't know at the time, but what was amazing that I know now was that a lot of times, again, a lot of your listeners, and maybe you guys do too, you beat yourselves up all the time for like thinking that you're not good enough, or feeling like, why can't I lose weight? Why can't I eat healthy? Why can't I exercise? What for me, it was like, well, why can't I be a scientist and work 80 hours a week? Like, what's wrong with me? And through this writing process, I realized, well, it's not my fault, because society and our culture has put so many of these things, like external things, on us that are so not how we used to live. It's no wonder that we're miserable.
Right.
And now that I understand that, it kind of took a weight off me, thinking that like, it was a moral failing. It was this mismatch that we have between what our brains and our bodies really actually need and what our society and our environment is giving us. And so that was really helpful for me to start making changes, because as soon as you stop blaming yourself for certain things, it's easier to make changes, And also, once you learn these things too, it's not your fault, but it becomes your responsibility, because making these changes to improve your health and wellness it's not going to come from outside. The environment is not going to change, but if it has to come from you.
Jenny, can you just touch a little bit, maybe at like a high level, when you say evolution has changed and that has now caused our behaviors to change? What are some examples of that?
Okay. Well, so it's that. So when we were evolving, animals and, early humans, like early human hominins, and, we evolved in lockstep with our environment, right? We evolved in response to environmental changes, and that's how, our brains got bigger, and we changed, our upright stance, and, all these different happened in response to the environment. But then we got to the point where our brains are so big and we're creative and we're intelligent that we started being able to make changes to meet challenges that didn't rely on evolution. We could just change our behavior. And that was revolutionary, because we didn't have to wait hundreds of thousands of years for our bodies and our genes, like a trait to evolve, to adapt to a situation. We could change our behavior and then pass that behavior on. And so then the agricultural revolution came about 10,000 years ago, and that was kind of a slow change. And then the Industrial Revolution came, and then the information age, the information revolution came. And so each one of those changes, 10,000 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago, the rate at which our environment is changing is so high that our bodies are like, what is going on? And also the fact that we can change our behavior, like the culture and the environment around us that we've created is changing our behaviors. And we don't realize that how we're changing our behaviors is actually working against our biology. So not only has it happened so fast that our bodies haven't evolved, but our behaviors have evolved. So we've kind of overshot. We're overcompensating. Our behaviors are now, they're not helping us. Our behaviors are what's hurting us. And so I'm hoping that if people can realize like how a lot of these behaviors evolved, like how we got to be hunter-gatherers and how that was such a successful adaptation for so long, and then see how it kind of went wrong when we started really changing our environment because we're so creative and intelligent, and how those things, we kind of didn't think about our bodies and what our bodies actually needed when we were making all of these changes.
Do you think that because again there's all this, agriculture era, the industry, and then the informatic era? I think that between the agriculture and the industry there was a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly after the industry it went really fast.
I totally agree.
And even in the informatic now, where we see, even with our kids, right, we see our behavior changing so much. Do you think that also has something with it, that our body cannot adapt so fast because it's changed lately, it's changed nonstop?
That's exactly what's happening. I totally agree that the agricultural revolution started it all. But that was about 10,000 years between then and, the industrial revolution. And then the industrial revolution, the rate of change got steeper, and then the age of information got a lot steeper. And like I said, we didn't make decisions based on what our bodies needed. Our bodies are responding to what our new and improved technology and our lifestyle, it's being imposed upon our bodies. So we are not necessarily making the best behavioral choices, the best lifestyle choices. And I believe it's because people just don't really understand what those choices would be. We've gotten so disconnected from what we actually need. And I think with the rise of all these non-communicable diseases, like anxiety and mental health issues, but type 2 diabetes and obesity and, all of these things that we never really used to suffer from. I think because it's become such a chronic problem that people are starting to turn to places to see, okay, there has to be a different way. There has to be another way that we can live. And it turns out like the way nature like kind of built into us what we needed to survive and thrive. And so we just kind of need to return to our roots a little bit. We've talked about how our genes haven't had much time to evolve. So we still have all of those basic needs, and our genetic makeup is very similar to almost identical to what we were as hunter-gatherers, with few exceptions. So we all have that hunter-gatherer in us. So we can all, once we start knowing what we need, our bodies will take over and be like, finally, you're giving me what we need, what I need, and now I can thrive and get, reverse some of these diseases of modernity.
So what will be the steps to go back to what our body really need, and, going to the foundation that we had?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's going to kind of start with education, right? I think the more people who are miserable and looking for another way, there's going to be kind of a period where people need to kind of teach themselves how we used to live, how we're living now. And it's not like we can just go back and live like hunter gatherers, and we wouldn't want to.
Just abandon our houses, go live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, even though to some people it's like, wow, that sounds so great. But our society's gotten to the point where we can't go back to living like that. And the modern world is not all doom and gloom and horrible. We have some amazing things that our technology has developed that could augment our lives so much more if we were healthy enough to enjoy it in the ways that it could really help us. So first it's going to be education. But then I don't know, for me, when I was writing the book, I got so overwhelmed with everything I wasn't doing. Like it all started like just wave after wave of I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this. And so it was almost paralyzing for a while until I started just making very small changes. And the changes that I made were, sleep, like basic sleep hygiene, getting in sun in the morning, decreasing blue light at night. Nutrition, eating more whole foods, less processed foods. That's easy. Work, I've really tried to learn how to separate work, from the rest of my life and not have it be so integrated, have boundaries, take breaks. Don't open your computer and check your email over the weekend. It's really hard to do, but those small little changes start making you feel better. And then the more that you feel better, the more changes you can make, So once you start with those small changes and you're noticing improvements about how you feel and you're not sleepy all the time, then you're like, hey, I'm ready for the next one. I'm ready for the next one. And it kind of like snowballs into this you're before you know it, 2 years later, you look back and you're like, how did I get here? And it was just one little step at a time.
I think one of the things that I appreciated so much about your book was that you do hit a lot on these different topics. And then you also kind of go back to it's almost relying on your community, right? It's the small changes, start small.
Mm-hmm.
And it immediately reminded me of kind of what we were trying to do with our work bestie community and the just reach out to that one person. Become friends with that one person at work, and it'll start to snowball, and everybody will start to appreciate and understand. So I
Totally.
feel like when I was reading some of the things in your book, it seemed to me that there's almost, it goes back to the evolutionary element of it. There is a desire and need for humans to have these connections. And
Mm-hmm.
because of the speeding up of time, we all feel more isolated than we ever have before. So
Exactly.
I'm curious if you agree with that, if you think there is a role that, like, whether your work bestie
To have
or
a gathering,
your
yeah.
community element of it, how that can help, like what kind of behaviors and elements would we need to help overcome some of these stresses or things of
Yeah.
burnout, things
Well,
like that.
I feel like, you know, when we were hunter gatherers, our bodies needed to be at their best because it was a survival, we needed to survive. Couldn't
Hmm.
be sick, we couldn't be overweight, we couldn't be tired, so we really had to take care of our bodies. But also when we were hunter gatherers, we could not survive without other people. Like we literally depended on other people to cooperate. We shared our food, we shared responsibilities, we shared child rearing. We had so many things that we were just so reliant on each other for. And it was essential for our survival. So we might not ever need to leave our house. We might not ever need to see another person in order to survive. But our psychology and our bodies don't know that. We still have that drive and we still have that need. So when those needs aren't met, there is, pathology, depression or anxiety or, any number of things like that. So I feel like also it's sort of a unique American thing where we're all rugged individuals and we can all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and you can do it alone. We can go it alone. And it's the antithesis of how we lived for millions of years in a group where we all helped each other. No one had to go it alone. No one had to raise their children all by themselves. No one had to go to work and be all by themselves. Work was, not only did we work less, but we worked a lot more with a kind of a playful spirit, like making connections with coworkers. The men would go hunt and the women would go gather. They both would leave the house, leave the village, and someone would be at the village and to help the kids, do with the kid thing. Or oftentimes, the older kids took care of little kids, and there was multi-group, multi-age play. But the women had their friends. They would sing, they would laugh, they would talk. It was a social outing, right? Going to work was a social outing.
Still
Yes,
work, but it was fun. It
yeah, it
was
was
yeah.
fun. It was fun. People, had best friends. I mean, this you even see this in like other primate communities, like chimpanzee communities. There are like chimpanzee best friends. They will like they will try to actually go and do the things they need to do with their friend because it makes it so much better and so much easier to do the things that are hard if you have a little bit of play in there. And your best friend always keeps you in check. If you're getting too anxious, they'll be like, what are you talking about? Or if you're lagging a little bit, like, come on, I need you, you have to help me. There's so many the things that having that social connection with someone else just balances you out. So you're not like, you're able to be more in the present moment because you have somebody there with you. If you're all by yourself, you're more likely to start worrying about the future or like thinking about, oh God, why did I say that to my boss? You're living in the past or you're living in the future. And I think being in social groups, being around other people helps anchor you into more of the present moment,
I feel
which
like
is
that's something we haven't chatted about. You're right. I think because you're having so much fun interacting with that person,
Mhm.
it's more about what's happening right then and there versus thinking about,
The past.
well, not only the past, but like I just need to work 5 more hours because that's going to prove to everyone that I get to the next level. And
right.
Yeah.
To your point, like it's okay to just sit there and live in the moment with your work bestie. You probably have more fun.
Well,
You'll get
it's
more.
not like you don't think about the future or the past, but you bring a
Yeah.
little more levity to it. It's not quite so serious. And if you live more in the present moment, your body's not in constant fight or flight. So you are actually more equipped to deal with problems that come up. If you think about the future and you're in a more centered present state of mind, it's easier for you to figure out how to deal with something
Right.
when you're not, like just so in the future, so worried, anxious, 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 fight or flight all the time. I think, people are like, well, you can't just live in the present moment. And it's true. But if you can be more present, then the changes in your body make it so you have more resources to deal with future
With
problems.
future stuff, yeah, it gives you that ability then to, when you are in that moment where you have to think about the future or reflect on the past, you're coming at it with a much more grounded, relaxed, sound state of mind. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. And there's many reasons why I really liked your book and talk and wanted to have you on our podcast. One of which was the fact that social connections continued to come up a lot in your book. The other one, though, that I'd love to chat a little bit about too was the connection to nature. So
Hmm.
this season in our work besties, we're really focusing on wellness and tips and tricks for our work bestie community out there. And one of the elements that you had in your book was all around, like, sometimes just being out in nature in and of itself helps you to kind of ground yourself. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think it follows really nicely with what we were talking about because about being present, because
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing more being in the present than being in nature. Um, you were looking at flowers and trees and the sky, and you have this sense of awe. It's very grounding in the present moment, and there's actually an evolutionary reason for that. The people who were attuned to nature were the ones who were more successful. They were the ones who took care of their bodies better because they could predict, like, oh, there's a storm coming. I can sense there's a storm coming. So they would protect themselves. Or, they were, if they were in a situation where there were maybe predators around, you had to be very in tune to what was going on around you. Like, are the birds singing? Oh, the birds stopped singing. What does that mean? A branch is bent a certain way. I know it's because the animal that we're hunting went this way, so we
On
need
there
to
in that
follow it. So
corner.
like you're so focused in on what's around you, and it's different because you have all of these all of your senses are in play, but they're not being overwhelmed. Like if you are in the city street and there's cars and there's noise and there's people and there's pollution, you have to walk around things. That's like a sensory overload,
Mhm.
right? But when you're out in nature, you kind of have this passive, all of your senses are working and they just have kind of gentle feedback. You're not being assaulted. You're just able to kind of like take it in at your own pace, and it's being in the present moment. And it actually, I'm sure you've heard of forest bathing. There are all these new studies coming out that show how being in nature like reduces your blood pressure, reduces the cortisol in your body, and all of that I think is wonderful for your mental health and your physical health. So then when you go back to, if you spend some time in nature and then go back to work, you're more productive. You're more creative. They actually have studies where people who went into nature instead of went for a walk in the city had like better scores on like measures of creativity and like better cognition, but not only, but yeah, better mental health, be more content, less stressed, but also better cognitive health.
So what were you calling? Because I didn't know the term. Is
Forest bathing.
forest
Like,
bathing.
yeah, and so there's actually this Japanese term. It means forest bathing, and it comes from Japan, where they actually have the doctors over there prescribe you need to go be in nature.
In nature.
Yeah, it's actually a prescription of like, this is what I think you need, and it makes total sense that being in nature would benefit our bodies because nature is our natural habitat. We are the species that does not live in our natural habitat and is actually, well, I was going to say thriving. I don't know about that, but
Varies, right?
yeah, it totally varies. But if you take other animals out of their natural habitat, they don't do very well unless they're really supported and get their needs. But it's amazing that we haven't gone extinct yet because we're not, we're totally in a completely artificial habitat, which no other species on the planet has ever done. So.
And yet we still continue to live longer, which is interesting.
Well, maybe so, but what's our health span?
Yeah,
right?
true. It's not necessarily healthily, but
yeah, I mean, I actually think our lifespan is actually going down for the first time.
Really? Okay.
And our health span is going way down. You might live till you're 75 on average, but like how many of those the last 10, 15 years are you enjoying it? Are you healthy?
Yeah. Interesting.
So
I did
yeah.
want to ask, so we live in a city, so we don't have a lot of just direct nature, but I mean, I will say one of my things that I enjoy most, and I feel much more centered on the days where I run in Central Park, because and I tend to run not just on the main path but in the like hiking trail area, so you are like literally
cool.
It's like trail running. You're not in and around people. It's like just you with trees. And I do feel much more calm and centered on those days. Are there other ideas of things that those that do work in a city can do throughout the day?
Yeah. I mean, I think some people feel like, oh, well, in order to interact with nature, I have to like make this big deal and like go to Yellowstone.
Yeah, go find a mountain to hike.
Little community gardens, or something that I love doing is just looking at the clouds, watching the sunset. Like, what's the quality of the light? What are are the clouds pink? Or is there a storm coming? But also just looking at, like, paying attention to the tree that's right there in the busy city street. You can like look at the leaves and be like, it's starting to change, or I wonder what kind of tree this is. Just having that curiosity. And man-made nature, like flower gardens, or being able to like, I heard there's, people who grow their own herbs in like a high-rise apartment building in New York City. And just the act of growing your own herbs, getting your hands in there and actually creating something, letting something grow. All of those things are interacting with nature.
It's almost stepping back, right, from even our everyday life and enjoying, like you said, enjoying the present, enjoying the sunset, the sunrise, in anywhere, the beauty of nature. Like I love what you say, that you don't have to go in a mountain or a hill. You can find it, and a lot of time we don't see that. It's really reaching out for this beauty.
Yeah, and in order to do that, we have to slow down. Because we're running from thing to thing. We're eating in our cars. We don't have time to like sit and look around when we're at a stoplight. But it's something that I've tried to learn how to do. And I've also really tried to teach my kids. Like, we're riding in the car. Oh my gosh, look at those clouds. Oh, did you see that bird? Like, just not being internal and like in our heads and in our car going to our next thing, but like what's going on around us. Because there's so many things that are nature that you don't really think about, that you kind of take for granted. And so becoming more attuned to those things really helps your state of mind.
And I mean, I love it because you were, saying about teaching your kids. And I've always done that with my son. I think he was sick of it, was like, oh my God, look at the sky. Oh my God, look at that cloud. Yeah. And it was about 2 weeks ago, and he's a teenager. So,
I guess I have one of those.
Yeah. But then, and I was so happy and so proud because he came to see me, and then he left the room and he looked outside. He's like, oh wow, look at that cloud, look at the sunset. And I was so happy that he stopped and looked at it. I appreciate. I think that you're right. It's also teaching, the people to just step out, and it's not only on video games and things like that. Because I do believe that we were, like you say, we were gatherer, but all this informatic and everything, we feel very lonely. You don't have this interaction as much as we used to.
Totally. And I think that really goes back to what we were talking about in terms of being around other people. Like, you had an influence on your son because you showed, you were a model for him, like, of seeing things in a different way, maybe. So that being together and like influencing the people around you to slow down, influencing the people around you to start opening their eyes and looking at nature. It comes from we're communicative, social, intelligent creatures, and that is how we teach and we learn, and that is how that's how we change. And so like we have to be around other people in order to transmit the things that we know to be good for us. And then those people who we've taught can teach others, and that's how it spreads.
So it kind of goes back to, yes, you can teach your kids, which is great, and you
Yes.
should. But you also can teach those in your work environment too.
Yeah.
Leverage your work bestie and the one other person. We have been talking about how throughout the day you have your 5-minute break. Another great example is just taking, whether it's the 5 minutes or a couple, half an hour of just going out and appreciating something else.
Mm-hmm.
And actually saying it to people, either going with them or having those conversations, because it's the small changes you commented on, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people think like, oh man, I don't have time for that. I have so much to do. When in reality, the studies have shown that taking breaks actually improves your performance. Once you reach a certain point, like working more isn't going to, you need to take a break so you can come back, and then you'll be more productive.
Refreshed, yeah.
Yeah.
So Jenny, you hit on a couple of things that really make sense for the working style world. What else would you recommend or talk about that you think are kind of some either small changes or big changes that can help when you are a person who does work a 9 to 5 or a very, kind of sitting at your desk style job?
Yeah, well, probably like kind of the four main things. If we look at hunter-gatherers and how they approached work, there's kind of four things. And we kind of touched on one of them, which is having more fun, infusing like a playful spirit at work. Also, we also alluded to another one is like we need to make sure we take our breaks and enjoy our leisure time. And we need to start listening to our bodies. Like if we're sick, we have to take care of ourselves. If we're tired, we need to go to sleep. We can't be like, oh, I got to stay up for 3 more hours to finish this. Like it'll eventually, I mean, it happened. I do the same thing.
Vlad literally texted me the other day, like, I know you're still up working, go to bed.
Because our bodies, we don't necessarily have to rely on our bodies and whether or not we're alert to survive anymore, but it does help our health.
Yeah.
We, like I was saying, we work so much longer than hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers maybe only worked 30% of the time when they were awake, maybe like 16 hours a week, getting food and things like that. And then they learned how to enjoy themselves, right? So, and we talked about being in the present moment. They lived and worked in the present moment. And that really helps as well.
And it was like, yes, they were working less because, again, it's a different type of working. But it has to do with nature because, again, it was a different habitat, right? They were more or less working with the sunset and sunrise. No, sunrise and
sunset,
yeah. So it's really that
Yeah.
it was depending on nature.
They were very attuned to the ebb and flow of the day. And there was one other thing so that would help people in the modern working world, and this is another hard one to do. So it's like slow down, but also we can live with less. And if we don't need as much, so like an entire hunter-gatherer group had fewer belongings than one agriculturalist early on. Like they just had the things that they could carry on their backs because they were nomadic. They moved all around. Like things were not important to them. It was their relationships. It was how they interacted. It was celebrations and dancing and singing. And it was really about relationships and connections, not about stuff. And so I think people get caught up in, I need to work more so I can make more money, so I can have more, so I can afford this stuff. And then it gets to the point where, I have to work more so I can make more money, so I can rent a storage facility, so I can keep all my stuff in the storage facility. Because there's just like houses have gotten bigger and bigger, and the number of people who live in them have gotten fewer and fewer. And yet we still have garages full of stuff, and we still have storage facilities full of stuff. And we don't, it's a cultural shift that has to happen, but we could live with less. And if we had less, we could work less.
I say that as a person who I'm a avid clothes shopper. I always battle with that too, where I'm like, I don't need this, but I really like it. So I hear you though, because I think
Yeah.
I do feel so much better when I go and do like a closet cleansing and I get all the stuff out of there and I can see everything that I have. Like you do feel, I don't know if it's psychological or what, but I do feel better. So I kind of understand what you mean. And it probably does go back to the hunting gathering days when you would, if I had to run, I wouldn't be able to grab any of this stuff. So what does it really matter?
You got to move out fast. You just got to, grab your kids and grab the stuff you can carry
Right.
and go. And that actually provided people a lot of freedom. If once you were in a house and you had all this stuff and it was a bad situation, you didn't feel like you could leave, right? Whereas if you just needed all the things on your back and you could just get out of a bad situation, you could move to another group. There wasn't any hard and fast rules about having to stay, where you are.
In that one tribe, yeah.
Yeah, there's all these groups kind of intermingled and came together and went apart. You could just go somewhere else and find a better situation for yourself.
But
You don't feel
think
stuck.
that human being though, they need that belonging, that sense of belonging though?
Yeah.
So you have to
if you're
find
not
it
getting it
somewhere
from the
else.
one, don't
Yeah.
force it. Go find that.
Yeah, don't go
situation
off and be
that
by yourself, because being by yourself is like the worst in a hunter-gatherer society. Being alone is like a death sentence, right? So if you're not getting what you need in this particular group, you go find another group. You take your stuff off. You have the freedom to move to another group and find what you need there.
So some of our listeners are a little younger and they probably are part of those that are very much attribed to the social media aspect. And then we know that certain elements like Instagram is not exactly always real or at all. What would be kind of your advice for like the younger generation if they're attuned to that? Like how do you help them adjust back to your point, this is not what our bodies are really meant for?
Yeah, well, I think, like we said about technology is great. And I think social media is a total double-edged sword because on one hand, we can find the people who think like, we can find our people. We can find the people who
find our tribe.
And we might not necessarily live in the same state, right? Or the same country even. But the fact that we can find each other and interact, I think that's great. Using social media for that, as opposed to using social media to attack somebody or, compare ourselves with somebody or, put something out there so we get likes, so we can feed our self-esteem, those are not the good ways to use social media. But if you're using social media to connect with people and like have friendships and stuff like that, I think that's a wonderful use of social media. However, there are limits to social media. And we were talking about this, I think, before we started recording. There are actual physiological things that happen when you're in the same room with somebody. That's different than being on a screen. I mean, you can get some of it from being on a screen or just being in contact with people is so important. But being in physical contact with somebody has so many other benefits. Like we were talking about, hugging somebody, you get oxytocin release, which is that belonging, feel good chemical. When you're sitting across from somebody, you start like mirroring their, you start mirroring their facial, their body language or their facial expressions. Those are mirroring neurons. And that makes you kind of feel like you're on the same wavelength with that person. And I haven't seen that happen as much on social media or face to, on a Zoom call. There's not that like, you can still get into the, the giggles and you can still kind of feel this energy, but it's not quite the same as being in person.
In the same room. Yeah.
And sometimes I have to say also because text also is huge. But again, it's so easy to misunderstand a text, right? That meanwhile, when you're talking, it's very easy. You understand.
You ask. What do you mean?
And text, it depends
on read your own connotation.
Exactly, depending on which one, what mood you're in. Like there's this commercial that's that's memes. That is actually very funny that it's between two people that one read the wrong way when the other one that is sending is really
Key and Peele have done a skit on it. It's hysterical where the one's really like do you still want to go out tonight, and he's just like do you still want to go out tonight, and he's like asking like in a nice way, and he's like, what do you mean do you want to go out tonight? And his response is like, no, do you? Like aggressive.
But it was
And the other guy's like, I don't know, I'm asking you. He's like all light and positive.
Yeah. It's true. It really depends. And I think also at the same time, technology did help us during COVID to stay in connection.
It was the only type of connection.
The only time you could have.
Yeah.
But then again, afterwards, I know, for example, with my friends, work bestie or whatever, once we found each other again in real life, it
Physical,
was
yeah.
again that need of touch that was so important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to ask you, Jen.
Okay.
Because we did reference this a little bit before we started recording. I saw that your book, which I highly recommend to those that are listening to get a copy of it and read it, on the origin of being. But I saw that this is book 1 of 3.
Mhm.
Right. Do you care to talk a little bit about maybe what's the book number 2 and when that might be out?
Sure. Like, as I was talking about when I met Luke and he was telling me about all these different things where we're not living in alignment. The first book was really just about sleep, nutrition, work and rest, and nature. But there are 6 other areas of, of our evolutionary behaviors that we think are really important too. And they kind of move up in like complexity, I guess. So these are our basic needs. Book 1 is our basic needs. And then book 2 focuses a lot on what we were talking about today, like our social groups, our social connections, why we evolved this way, why it's important, and child rearing, because I'm sure we could have tons of podcasts about
like that could be
parenting
a whole series.
And about the sexes, like, have we always been in a male-dominated society? Let's see the evolutionary record, right?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, women worked away from the home all the time. You know what I mean? So there's so much rich stuff there to talk about and to think about. So that's book 2. And then book 3 kind of gets into more complex things like the arts. How does storytelling and singing and dancing, how does that affect us, and how does that affect how we bond with other people? Rituals, how important rituals are. Rites of passage are. And then we talk about religion and spirituality. So these are like really high level human stuff, and so that's in book 3. And so we're hoping to, at the end of this year, to release book 2, and then the end of next year, release book 3. So it'll be our little trilogy.
I feel like all 3 of these books are so on brand for the work besties and help kind of explain some of the why behind the importance of having a work bestie. So we appreciate you being on, and we're going to be looking forward to reading book 2 and 3, and we may tap you again if you're interested.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been a really fun conversation. And like I said, it would be so much fun to have a podcast with my best friend, my work bestie.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the concept and the energy that you guys play off of each other and bring. It's been a really fun talking with you.
Well, the good news is that there's so many other work besties out there that are like this, that
we
want to continue to start that movement. And just like you said, one small change at a
time.
One
little change at a time.
It takes one small change. And you take a step back and you're like, okay, I mastered that. Let's do the next step.
Yep. And having your work bestie at your side, or your bestie, they don't have to be your work bestie, but just your bestie. Having somebody at your side while you're doing those things makes those things easier to do, and they stick and they last longer, and you support each other.
Even the hard things,
it's
like to your point,
it's make it or break it.
The nutrition, like paying attention to not having so much sugar, having that one exercise a day or whatever, it definitely helps.
It's like you have, a gym buddy and, all those different that help you to be accountable.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Because it's very hard alone. And having a work bestie that became a bestie or work best,
or just
that makes a big difference.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, thank you, Jenny.
It's not what you do; it's who you spend your time with.
Oh yeah,
oh definitely.
That's an amazing tagline.
Where did the tagline?
You should totally make that your little work besties who podcast. It's not what you do; it's who you're with.
Yeah, and just like that, you're going to see it change. Jenny.
You're welcome. You can have that. You can have that one.
It worked. Oh gosh, Jenny, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I
You're
just so
welcome.
appreciate you being willing to come on our humble podcast because I feel, as we mentioned, we heard you on other podcasts, and you are just such a wealth of knowledge and so
Thanks.
interesting. And I love that you could kind of help explain it in our terms. So we appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Like I said, it was so wonderful that you reached out and were interested. I'm like, this sounds like a great match. Um, yeah, I'll keep in touch with you all.
Yeah,
Definitely. I would love that.
So, for all the work besties out there, we hope you enjoyed this and we hope you take away from this to do just one small change. Even if it is just reaching out and finding a new bestie, or it's thinking
Doing
about your
with your bestie.
nutrition. Yeah, doing with your bestie, going out in nature, just appreciating things, taking that step to recharge. And don't forget to check out Jenny's book on the origin of being and her upcoming book series, which we're all excited about. And make sure to like and subscribe and check out Jenny's socials that we will keep in our notes. So with that, thank you
Thank you all. Bye.
Remember, whether you're swapping snacks in the break room, rescuing each other from endless meetings, or just sending that perfectly timed meme, having a work bestie is like having your own personal hype squad.
So keep lifting each other up, laughing through the chaos, and of course, thriving. Until next time, stay positive, stay productive, and don't forget to keep supporting each other.